This is just 24 hours ago. Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. It's 2 minutes long, but it's captivating. Cut number 14.
Americans have this direct association, these conversations, this talk of a world war. They think that if this happens, it would only concern Europe, which is a very showing thing that reflects the mentality of those geopolitical strategists in the US, because they are confident that they will just be safe across the ocean. And in this situation, one has to understand that we have our own doctrine, a doctrine of using nuclear weapons, among other things, and we are now making adjustments to this doctrine, and the Americans are well aware of this doctrine. And you know, these are Freudian sleep. The World War III is a bad thing because we do not want Europe to suffer. That's the mentality of the Americans, mentality of masters that are sitting on the other bank across the ocean. They are certain of their safety and security, and they are confident that there would be someone else to die for them, to do their dirty job for them, not only Ukrainians, but now Europeans as well. So we heard these speculations regarding allowing to use not only Storm Shadows, but also American missiles, long-range missiles. And in Washington, an anonymous source said that there is an ongoing effort, that they are looking into a request from Ukraine in a positive light. I do not want to add anything to that. The president has already spoken on this on many occasions, and we reaffirm this once again, that playing with fire, and they are like little kids who are playing games with matches. It's a dangerous thing for adults who were trusted with nuclear weapons.
That's about as bellicose as I've heard him in the post-Ukraine time period. What do you think?
Foreign Minister Lavrov is a foreign minister in the tradition of Nesselrode, Gorshakov, the great czarist foreign ministers that served for many decades. He's been in office now for 20 years. This is incomprehensible to us. We go through something that our mutual friend Chaz Freeman likes to call a massive lobotomy every 4 years in Washington, D.C. There is no continuity of governance. There's no certainty of anything continuing without being disrupted by squabbling politicians. This is not the case with Lavrov. When he speaks, he's speaking for the Russian state as well as for President Putin. He's not going to say anything that President Putin would not also say, but he's frequently more eloquent. And in this case, he's pointing to some very straightforward things that you and I have discussed before. We don't seem to understand it. Number one, that the United States on the North American continent in the Western Hemisphere is not invulnerable, invincible, or invisible. In other words, it can be attacked. Now, there are many, many ways to do that. We've talked previously about horizontal escalation, and the Russians have relations with Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico, and others that can cause enormous difficulties for us, although it's hard to imagine things getting much worse than they already are in our country, thanks to these open borders, but I think they could. And that's one thing. But he's also essentially implying, look, we have submarines. We have a large submarine fleet. They're cruising off your shores. You think that you can just consign Ukrainians and other Europeans to destruction on the battlefield? You're wrong. That if you think you can get away unscathed, that's not how this will play out. And then finally, he's mentioning the nuclear dimension. Now, President Putin spoke recently and said, we have no need for the use of nuclear weapons. And he's right. They don't need them. The problem, though, is that there are people inside this administration that think we may need them in order to assert our dominance. And that's the real danger. And that's what he is, by inference, referring to.
What do you think he meant when he said we are recalibrating or engaging in adjustments to our nuclear doctrines. Their doctrine was no first strike. Are they now no longer following that?
I think they are looking carefully at what we do and our actions. And if they think that we are moving nuclear weapons closer to Russia, that we are readying nuclear forces in the continental United States or at sea for use against them, they are effectively telling us that they reserve the right to preempt us. But they would only do that if they were convinced 100% that we were preparing to pull the trigger ourselves.
And in
So we should avoid that, Judge. The point is,
right,
we should avoid this. There should, if we want to avoid Armageddon, we need to stand up and say, we are removing the nuclear weapons from the naval combatants. We are removing nuclear weapons from any of our aircraft. We are standing down from, a high state of readiness in the United States. We are not going to use nuclear weapons. We refuse to do that. In fact, Biden has signed, I don't think he ever understood what he was signing, has signed a doctrine into existence. It's just the opposite. And you have these dangerous, foolish warmongers inside Washington, D.C. that think this is wonderful. They're out of touch with reality. They don't understand how dramatically war has changed. They don't understand how vulnerable we are. They refuse to accept those arguments. And right now we're in a position of extreme danger. And that's what Lavrov is telling us.
And does the State Department and does the Pentagon not understand this? Because they seem still to be hell-bent on American global hegemony, notwithstanding any of the reality that you just summarized.
I can't speak for, quote unquote, the Pentagon. You've got Lloyd Austin over there and the people behind him. What he's saying privately is unknown to me. I know that on previous occasions, he's pointed to some realities that did not go down well with the White House. I cannot imagine that he is not warning against this very dangerous proposition that we should be prepared to use a nuclear weapon. I hope, but I have no way of knowing. Now, inside the force itself, we do have more than a few delusional senior officers. And this business of, you point out, global military hegemony, when you've lived all of your life at the center of the so-called universe, which is where most Americans have lived, at least for the last 60, 70 years, it's very hard to adjust to the idea that we are now one of several great powers. And we are a great economic power, but so is China, so is India. And these places matter in a world where we think only we matter. And Americans are fed the diet of what I would call national narcissism. No one speaks realistically to the American people. That's not because the American people won't listen. It's because they don't want to admit the truth, which is that we are no longer the hegemonic power. And by the way, we don't want to be the hegemonic power. That's a very dumb idea. It's costly. It's impossible to maintain. We don't need it. But no one in Washington will stand up and say that.
Colonel McGregor, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for your thoughtful analysis.